All right, let's pick up in part 2 of Reconstruction. We already went over all this. Sorry. And we are right here. So we talked about reprogramming former slaves, which obviously teaching former slaves to read and write is very important. But there is a reprogramming element that is necessary or unnecessary, depends on where you see. And it's not just Thaddeus Stevens and Renegade History. You can read Up from Slavery by Booker T. Washington, read from W.E.B. Du Bois, and you're going to get the idea of what really is going on that no one really will come out and say in your secondary textbooks, in your secondary sources, your U.S. history textbooks. Next issue with Reconstruction is you have former Confederate soldiers or just people in the South, and they have to learn there's a new way of life. And for 40, 80 years, they've been told that blacks are inferior, slavery's okay. Now, all of a sudden, these white people have to learn that, wait. So there's no racism and we're all equal. Yep, you got to change immediately. That's pretty shocking. That's going to be hard to do. And so again, it's not going to be surprised that Reconstruction is going to fail. So how do we get these southern states back into the Union? How do we go from a Confederacy? How do we rejoin them into the United States so that in 1870 everyone is back part of the United States? First plan is the Wade-Davis bill, and the Wade-Davis bill says, look, if 50% of the citizens of a state, let's say South Carolina or whatever Confederate state you want to think of, if they agree to a loyalty oath and say, hey, we're going to be a part of the United States, we're never going to be bad again, we promise, we swear. If 50% of them agree, then we're going to let them back in. Lincoln says, man, that's probably too much. Now, also, though, part of that is you can't be a Confederate soldier. So if you were a soldier, you can say you're going to be good as much as you want. We ain't listening, okay? You literally fought a war. You took up arms against us. So, okay, now 50% of people agree, then that state can join. That's going to be pocket vetoed by Abraham Lincoln. A pocket veto is where he doesn't necessarily veto, he just fails to pass it, and eventually it dies. Lincoln believes in a 10%. It's like, 50% is a little steep. Let's go 10% loyalty oath. We'll let the states back in. Let's get this nation rolling again. 10%, he says, and then he gets shot in the back of the head. That's not going to work. So that was a very lenient, very fair policy. Maybe too fair, maybe too lenient. Doesn't matter. We never get to know because Lincoln gets assassinated quickly after the signing of the end of the war at the Appomattox Courthouse. All right, so the radical Republicans are going to jump in, and that is Lincoln's party, the Republicans, but they're obviously a little more extreme because they're known as the radical Republicans, and they're going to have their own plan that's pretty harsh, according to the new president, Andrew Johnson. We'll get to him in a second. The radical Republicans say, here's the deal. If you want back into the United States, you got to create a new state constitution, which allows freed black men the right to vote. So your old constitution has to be ripped up, and your new state has to create a new fair constitution. One. Number two, you have to ratify the 14th Amendment, which has an equality clause, or the equal protection of the law clause, which says that all citizens must be treated equal under the law by the state government. That already exists in the U.S. Constitution. The Fifth Amendment grants all citizens federal due process. But we go step further to make sure that the states are also treating people equally. That's in the 14th Amendment, which also defines citizenship, which means that the slaves are citizens. They have rights, but also they must be treated equal by the state governments. The state governments must treat all citizens equal. You have to agree with that, ratify it to the Constitution, do those two things, and your state can rejoin the Union. So now we've got this argument between Andrew Johnson and the radical Republicans because Andrew Johnson's the president now. Lincoln's dead. Andrew Johnson's over. Andrew Johnson's a Southerner. He doesn't see things the same way as the radical Republicans. There are times where he was harsh on the South, but for the most part, he was harsh on or towards the elite, the plantation owners, the supposed slave power, which I shouldn't say supposed. There was slave power. It did exist. The elite slave power, plantation owners who pushed for secession, who pushed towards war. He wasn't really interested in being harsh to the citizens that really, yeah, they did fight in the war, but the women, the children, and many of the men, they didn't have political power. They didn't have any say. They didn't own slaves. They weren't part of the slave power. They weren't a part of the ruling class. And so why are we punishing them? If you want to punish people, take away the rights and the freedoms of the elite, the ruling class, the people that pushed for secession, the people that pushed all of these slave power issues that led to secession, and then they also pushed for war. Those are the ones that we should punish, according to Andrew Johnson. So here's the issue. It's going to come down to the president's cabinet. My animations are messed up, so bear with me. Johnson's the vice president. Lincoln's the president. Lincoln dies. That means Johnson takes over. Johnson has a issue with Edwin Stanton, the Secretary of War, who is really the boy of the radical Republicans in carrying out Reconstruction policy. As we mentioned before, Johnson doesn't really get along with them. Johnson, although he was harsh towards the plantation owners, wasn't really harsh to the South in general. And so he did not necessarily agree with the radical Republicans' extreme plan for Reconstruction. And Edwin Stanton was the guy leading the Reconstruction. So Johnson's going to fire him. And Johnson, to his credit, or not his credit, but his belief is that, look, you're part of my cabinet. If you can't do your job, you're gone. I didn't pick you to start out with. I was nice enough to allow Lincoln's cabinet to stay on when I took over. You're not doing the job that I don't like, so I'm going to let you go. I don't agree with the way that you and the radical Republicans want to carry out Reconstruction, so I'm going to fire you. Well, they're not happy with that. That's their boy in the executive branch helping to do their bidding. Well, Johnson doesn't care. Like, look, I'm the captain now. I'm the president of the United States. This is my cabinet, not your cabinet. I'm going to fire him because he's not working well with my team. So it's my team. He gone. Well, funny thing is, about 2 days ago, we passed a law that said you can't do that anymore. Interesting. Very funny that you actually did that. That's really great. So they say, look, you're breaking the law. We just said you can't do that, and you did that, so you're impeached. And so he gets impeached. Johnson's like, well, great. You still need 2/3 of a vote in the Senate to fire me. Yeah, I'm impeached. I'll go to trial in the Senate. You're not going to get 2/3. You're just wasting your time. And the Senate's basically like, yeah, you're right. Now, it was really close. One vote short. But still, you're just wasting the people's time. And so Johnson's going to brush off the haters. He's going to remain president. They're going to fight back. And they're basically, because they have a supermajority with their 2/3 votes, can override all of his vetoes. So anytime that Johnson, for the rest of his presidency, tries to get in the way of their Reconstruction plans by the radical Republicans, they're just going to override his vetoes, like when we talk about the Civil Rights Act coming up. So very contentious. Good thing, though, for American citizens and the students and the media today that we learn from this mess, right? We learned today we don't need to repeat this again, right? They knew in 1860 they tried to kick out the president for maybe not the best reasons, but they knew when they impeached him, they weren't really going to get rid of him. And they just wasted the country's time. And so the good thing that we have taught this for years and years and years, and every student and every person in the media today and every politician and every American today knows that, yeah, what a waste. If you can't remove the person, why even bother impeaching? We learned, wait a second. I don't think we did learn that lesson. Well, at least, yeah, that's right, we did. We wasted the country's time with a fake impeachment, didn't we? We could have learned from Johnson. Well, at least we didn't do all this nonsense during the biggest crisis in the last 50, oh no, yeah. Yeah, there was a pandemic, wasn't there? It's the worst crisis in 50 years, and we did something that we should have been taught not to do. Well, hopefully with this video, we won't repeat this mistake again. Guess what? You know we will repeat this mistake. We'll probably impeach the president within the next couple days, the way that it's going. We're probably going to impeach every president every time moving forward. So get used to that, folks. Reconstruction, the Freedmen's Bureau will be designed to help former slaves, education, healthcare, work, job opportunities, you name it. So it's a government agency like the many social services that we have today will be created to help out former slaves. It also will help out poor white people too, because there are plenty of poor white people in the South during this time. Like, we get this idea like, oh, all these rich white people and the poor black people. Well, there's a couple really, really rich white people, and then there's a lot of poor white people, and then there's a lot of slaves down here. So there is a divide where the government can come in and help people out, but eventually Johnson, remember, doesn't really like the Reconstruction policy. He's just going to defund the Freedmen's Bureau. It will end in 1872. He also will stop the whole 40 acres and a mule thing. Not getting along with those Republicans. So, I mean, we can look at this as, man, that's a major failure because the Freedmen's Bureau was educating former slaves. It was teaching them how to read and to write and a lot of different ways to behave. Again, you can read W.E.B. Du Bois, you can read Booker T. Washington and get a couple different views of what was happening. There's plenty of texts talking about what Reconstruction was, but then there's also the other view of they were brainwashing former slaves into becoming this American worker, an industrialist, a part of the machine. So from that point of view, for the most part, your general understanding, your clear-pilled version or your blue-pilled version of your blue-pilled version of Andrew Johnson is this terrible guy. He stopped Reconstruction, and if it wasn't for Andrew Johnson, Reconstruction would have carried on, and we would have had equality 100 years ago. Now that's really foolish and naive to believe that one man, even if Reconstruction continued on, do you really think that Reconstruction would have worked very well? Nonetheless, there's now another view that what were they really trying to teach? What were they really training these former slaves into being? Renegade History, check it out for that kind of different view of Reconstruction. That will not be on your APUS history test. The APUS history test will be, oh, it's so bad. We could have had equality 100 years ago. This evil racist president got in the way of the radical Republicans. If it wasn't for him, former slaves would have been educated and they all would have taken and followed the lead of Booker T. Washington, and this nation would be better, stronger, and more equal. Maybe that's it's possible, but that's definitely what you want to put on your APUS history test. So then we got this idea of like equal. It's a very challenging situation. The South was not Candyland. We just went through a war. The mindset of if former slaves, and then you have people who were oppressing the slaves, and now all of a sudden they have to, all right, you guys are all equal now. Same rights, treat each other fairly, no discrimination. You think that's going to happen? Do you think they're even going to listen to the government? Of course not. And so we quickly get black codes, which are laws in these southern states. This is going to pave the way for Jim Crow laws in the 20th century. In the 19th century, after slavery and after the slave codes, we get the black codes during Reconstruction. And the black codes are just legal ways for discrimination, legal ways to limit the rights of former slaves, legal ways to segregate. So that's the black codes. These are, force segregation. You're going to create vagrancy laws. I'm not going to talk about some vagrancy law stuff. Read Renegade History. Trying not to get canceled today. Very interesting angle, again, that you're not going to get from your APUS history teacher for your APUS history exam. That's going to say vagrancy laws were just simply another way to enslave black people. It's true. Vagrancy laws were definitely used as a way to round up free African Americans and to re-enslave them, throw them into a prison, throw them back into a forced labor camp. That is your generally accepted history of black codes and vagrancy laws. And that's what will be on your APUS history test. And that is what your American history teacher is going to tell you because they don't want to get canceled. If you want to know a different view, interesting angle. And it's not a big part of it, but check out Renegade History. I'm not going into it because I don't want to get canceled. The other part to close out is sharecropping will become a part of the Southern economy. So the plantation before was owned by the big plantation owner, and the slaves were working the plantation. Well, the slaves are free. Who's going to work on my plantation? So what the plantation owner does is says, look, I'm going to take my giant plantation, and I'm going to break it up into smaller farms. All these different farms, all right? A cotton and corn farm, a cotton farm, a pasture, cotton, like so all these different farms. So he takes this giant farm and he breaks it up and he gives each piece to a former slave and says, here's the deal. You can basically rent the land from me and you can farm the land and you make your money farming this land. You sell your money at the market. When you make your money at market, then you pay me my rent for a year. And so that's how it works. Basically, you can stay on the farm. You can continue to be a farmer. You can do what you know. You're just going to run your own show. It's my land. So at the end of every year, after your harvest and after you take your crops to market and you make money, then you pay me back. And that's just how we'll do this thing year after year. The problem is The system never really worked for the former slave. They were always going into debt. They were never making any money. And year after year, the debt would rise and rise and rise and rise. And so, look, if you owe the plantation owner $100, which is a lot then guess what? You can't leave. You owe me $100. I'll tell you what, former slave. Sorry, it's a Freudian slip. You're a former slave. You're my friend. You're my pal. You owe me $100. As soon as you pay off the $100, you say you don't want to do this anymore. You say you want to get out of here. You don't want to do the farming thing. It's just been really rough. As soon as you pay me back, you're gone. You're free. You're gone. But you got to pay me back first. Can't leave right now. You got to farm this land until you pay me back. But once you pay me back, you're free, right? You're free. You go move to the city. Do whatever you want. Well, they never were able to pay off that debt. So in reality, sharecropping, where I'm just sharing. Sharing is caring, guys. Well, it is if the ex-slaves could make money, but they never could make money. They just went into debt. And when they're in debt, they can't leave. Hey, sounds kind of like today. Like you go to college. Now, it's not like college, but there's kind of a similarity. You take this giant debt and you're free to do what? Well, I got to go work, pay off this giant, massive debt that's on my back. Modern sharecropping. It's not quite the same, but there are some similarities. Debt is debt, and debt definitely keeps people from being free. Unless you can declare bankruptcy. Like some people are able to declare bankruptcy and be free. So that's sharecropping, just a new version of slavery. We'll say that a lot. The new version of slavery.